You know that feeling when everything in life just clicks? Like you finally found your little corner of peace, and you start to think, hey, maybe I've actually got it all figured out? Yeah, that was me right before my neighbor and his precious HOA decided to turn my world upside down. So, let me paint the picture for you. My house sits at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where folks wave when they drive by, kids ride their bikes till sunset, and everyone sort of minds their own business. Birds, sunshine, weekend barbecues, you get it. I had a small patch of land, just enough space to stretch out without feeling like I was breathing down someone else's neck. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I loved it. Now, here's the funny thing, technically, my house wasn't part of the HOA. Yeah, my property was what they called grandfathered in. Basically, the HOA controlled most of the houses down the street, but my place? My little slice of freedom? Off limits. No dues, no rules, no random letters about what color my mailbox should be. And trust me, that freedom felt good. But you know who didn't like that freedom? My neighbor, Greg. Now, I'm not saying Greg was a bad guy at first, but let's just say, if the HOA had a superhero, Greg would have been their Captain America, clipboard and all. He was one of those people who believed neighborhood rules were sacred. Like, if your trash can was out 5 minutes past pickup, Greg knew. If your grass was 1 inch too long, Greg knew. If your curtains were the wrong shade of beige, you guessed it, Greg definitely knew. And he didn't just know, he cared. A little too much. I'd see him sometimes on my morning walks, marching around with that HOA binder tucked under his arm like it was a Bible. He'd stop by every other driveway, checking in on folks, making sure the neighborhood stayed presentable. He was the self-appointed sheriff of suburbia, and somehow, I'd ended up living right next to him. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone's got that one neighbor, right? The one who takes things a little too seriously. So, I just smiled, waved, and kept to myself. I figured if I stayed chill, there'd be no reason for drama. Spoiler alert, I was wrong. Greg had this way of reminding me, every chance he got, that I wasn't technically under the HOA. He'd say things like, you know, even though you're technically exempt, it's good to follow community standards. I'd laugh it off. Sure thing, Greg. But behind that polite smile, I could tell it bugged him. He didn't like that I didn't have to answer to the same rules as everyone else. It was like he couldn't stand the idea that someone could live free right next door without permission slips and board approvals. For a while, everything stayed quiet. My days were simple: wake up, enjoy my coffee on the porch, watch the sunrise. Sometimes I'd chat with a few of the nicer neighbors, the ones who didn't care about HOA politics, and they'd joke about how lucky I was to live outside the HOA zone. And honestly, I was lucky. Until Greg decided to test how far that luck could go. It started with little comments. You know, your fence doesn't match the rest of the neighborhood. Then, I noticed your lawn service doesn't use the approved vendor. Then, I saw your dog off leash, we have rules about that. That last one made me laugh. We? Greg, buddy. I'm not in your HOA. Remember? He just gave me that tight smile. The kind that says, we'll see about that. And that's when I should have known something was brewing. Because right around then, I started getting strange letters in my mailbox, official-looking ones, with the HOA logo on top. They weren't addressed properly, but they all said the same thing: violation notice. Violation of what, exactly? Existing? I thought it was some mix-up, so I ignored the first few. But Greg? Oh, he was watching. Every time I'd grab my mail, I'd catch him peeking over his hedge like a nosy meerkat, pretending to water his plants. He wanted a reaction. But I wasn't about to give him one. At least, not yet. Back then, I had no clue what was coming. No idea that Greg and his little HOA army were gearing up to pull the wildest stunt I'd ever seen, something that would nearly get me kicked out of the home I'd built with my own hands. Looking back now, I laugh about it. But at the time? Man, it was chaos. Pure, unnecessary chaos. If I'd known what was about to unfold, I probably would have built a moat around my property. Because trust me, once Greg and his HOA decided to come for me, they didn't just bring letters. They brought war. You ever have one of those moments where something weird happens, and you just shrug it off, thinking, probably nothing, only to realize later that was the exact moment the storm started brewing? Yeah, that's where my story really starts to pick up. It began with a letter. Now, I'm not talking about a friendly, welcome to the neighborhood type letter. Nope. This one looked official. Like, government level official. White envelope, HOA logo on the corner, bold letters that read, Notice of Violation. I remember standing there on my porch, coffee in hand, sunlight hitting my face, and just thinking. Violation of what? Breathing? I opened it up, half laughing already, and inside was this long list of nonsense. It said something like, your trash cans must be stored out of sight after pickup days to maintain community appearance. Then it listed a fine schedule, $5 per day if I didn't comply. Now, let me remind you, my house wasn't under their HOA. I didn't sign any contract. I didn't pay any dues. My property was legally outside their control. So reading that letter felt like getting a parking ticket from a guy who thinks he's a cop. I chuckled, tossed it in the kitchen drawer with the rest of my random mail, and went on with my day. Big mistake. Because the next week, I got another one. This time, it said I was in violation for improper lawn maintenance. Apparently, my grass was 0.5 inches taller than the community standard. Like seriously, who's out here measuring grass with a ruler? Oh right, Greg. The man had apparently appointed himself as the lawn police. I saw him later that afternoon, standing by his mailbox with that same smug look. He waved the way people wave when they're pretending to be nice. Hey there, he said. Just wanted to make sure you got your notice. The HOA board's been concerned. I blinked. Greg, I'm not in your HOA. He gave this awkward little chuckle, like I just didn't understand how things worked. Oh, I know. But you are in the community. It's just about keeping things uniform. Uniform? I asked. You want me to pay fines for grass? He smiled, that slow, condescending kind of smile that makes your blood pressure spike. It's not about the money, it's about standards. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a one-time thing. Over the next few weeks, the notes started multiplying. One taped to my trash can lid said, HOA approved cans must be black, not blue. Another one got slipped under my doormat, your fence color is inconsistent with community guidelines. I mean, what guidelines? I didn't even have the rulebook. It was almost funny, almost. I even joked about it to one of my friends on the phone, man, my neighbor's out here running a one-man government. We both laughed. But behind that laugh, I could feel it, that creeping irritation building up inside me. See, at first, I honestly thought it was some harmless misunderstanding. Maybe Greg didn't know I was exempt. So one evening, I grabbed my property documents, the original deed, the exemption clause, everything, and walked over to his house. Greg opened the door wearing a polo shirt tucked into khaki shorts. The man looked like the human version of an HOA brochure. Hey Greg, I said, holding up the papers. Just wanted to clear something up. My property's grandfathered in, not under HOA jurisdiction. So you can tell your board to stop sending me these letters. He looked at me, scanned the papers like he was some kind of lawyer, and said, well, even if you're technically outside the association, you should still comply voluntarily. It's the neighborly thing to do. I almost laughed right there. So you want me to follow rules I never agreed to out of kindness? Exactly, he said, smiling proudly like he'd just solved world peace. That's when I knew I was dealing with a different breed of neighbor. The type that doesn't stop when you say no, the type that hears I'm not under your rules and thinks, we'll see about that. After that, things started feeling off. I'd catch Greg walking by my house a little too slowly, clipboard in hand, pretending to check his phone while eyeballing my yard. Once, I came home to find a bright orange notice stuck to my front gate. It wasn't signed, but I knew exactly who it came from. Unapproved exterior modifications, it said. The modification in question? A birdhouse. I'd hung a birdhouse. That's when I started realizing something. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. And the more I brushed it off, the bolder Greg got. Looking back now, I should have taken it seriously sooner. I should have realized these weren't random letters, they were warning shots. Greg wasn't just annoyed, he was plotting something. But back then? I just laughed it off again. Thought it'd blow over. Turns out, it wasn't blowing over. It was just getting started. You know that feeling when you think something's just neighborhood drama, a couple of harmless letters, maybe a grumpy neighbor with too much free time, and then suddenly it turns official? Yeah. That was the day the envelope showed up. It was a Wednesday morning, bright and quiet. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when I saw it, a big white envelope sitting in my mailbox, bold red stamp on the corner that read, "Important HOA notice." For a second, I just stared at it. My first thought? You've got to be kidding me. By that point, I'd already received enough fake violation notes from Greg to wallpaper my living room. So I figured this was just another one of his little side projects. But when I tore it open and started reading, my jaw actually dropped. It wasn't a note. It was a full-on formal notice of violation, signed by the Homeowners Association Enforcement Committee. They claimed I had multiple unaddressed infractions, including an unapproved exterior color scheme, improper waste storage, and my personal favorite, failure to comply with neighborhood harmony guidelines. Neighborhood harmony. I didn't even know that was a real phrase outside of yoga retreats. Then I saw the real kicker. Failure to comply within 14 days may result in legal action, including property liens and potential eviction proceedings. Eviction. They actually wrote eviction. I had to read that line 3 times. I remember laughing out loud, one of those laughs where you don't even find it funny, you're just too stunned to react normally. Evict me? From my own property? That's rich, I said to myself, shaking my head. I mean, imagine being told by an organization you're not even part of that they're going to kick you out of your own home. That's like a gym trying to ban you from the treadmill when you've never signed up for a membership. Still, I figured this was some clerical error. Maybe Greg had given them the wrong address, or the HOA board didn't know about my grandfathered exemption. Easy fix, right? So I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter. A polite lady answered, all cheerful and customer servicey. Homeowners Association office, this is Cheryl, how can I help you today? I said, hey Cheryl, I just got this notice about HOA violations, but my property's not actually under your HOA. I think there's been a mistake. There was a pause. Papers rustling. Then she said, can I get your address? I gave it to her, and she went quiet again. You could almost hear the gears turning in her head. She said. Well, according to our records, your property is within the boundaries of the association. No, it's not, I said, already pulling up my property deed from my folder. My place was built before the HOA was formed. It's grandfathered out. I've got documentation. She gave this polite little sigh, the kind of sigh that says, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, sir, she said, if you believe that, you'll need to submit proof of exemption to our compliance committee within 7 business days. Until then, you're expected to follow HOA guidelines. I had to stop myself from laughing again. You're saying I have to prove I don't belong to your HOA? That's correct. And if I don't? Then we'll proceed with enforcement action. I hung up before I said something that would have made things worse. I sat there staring at that letter, just baffled. Shocked. Confused. And yeah, a little amused. Because the whole situation was so ridiculous it felt like a bad sitcom. But underneath that amusement, I could feel something else creeping in, frustration. That letter wasn't just Greg being nosy anymore. This was official. Somebody on that board had taken his words seriously enough to try to enforce it. So, like any rational person, I gathered my papers, my property deed, survey maps, exemption documents, everything, and decided to go straight to the source. The HOA office was only a few blocks away, tucked behind a row of fancy-looking homes with identical lawns and the same approved mailbox design. When I walked in, the place smelled like air freshener and printer ink. I told the receptionist why I was there, handed over my documents, and waited while she flipped through them with a confused look. "Oh, I'll need to talk to our compliance manager," she said, disappearing into the back. A few minutes later, a man in a crisp blue shirt came out. Name tag said Dennis. He looked me up and down like I'd just tracked mud onto his marble floor. "Sir," he said, "according to our latest boundary revision, your property is included within the association." "Boundary revision?" I said. "You can't just redraw lines and claim ownership over private property. That's not how this works." He smiled. "Our legal team would disagree." I felt my jaw tighten. "Then your legal team's in for a surprise, because I've got a signed document from the county confirming my exemption." He didn't even look at it. "Submit it in writing," he said flatly. "We'll review it and get back to you." And that was that. I walked out, still clutching my papers, half laughing, half fuming. By the time I got home, Greg was outside again, watering his plants, pretending not to notice me. But that smirk on his face said everything. He knew exactly what was going on. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I realized something serious. This wasn't just Greg's little hobby anymore. The HOA had actually stepped into it. They'd made it official. And if I thought they were bluffing before, I was about to learn the hard way that they were just getting started. Alright, so remember Greg, the clipboard warrior, the self-appointed sheriff of the block? Well, turns out his real name wasn't Greg. It was Carl. Yeah, Carl, the kind of name that sounds harmless enough, like a guy who'd help you move a couch or lend you a lawnmower. But don't let that fool you. Carl wasn't just a nosy neighbor. Nope. He was the vice president of the HOA. Yeah. The vice president. I found that out one afternoon when I was flipping through one of those glossy HOA newsletters that somehow showed up in my mailbox again, even though I wasn't part of their little empire. On page 2, there it was, a smiling picture of Carl in a polo shirt, shaking hands with the HOA president under the headline, "Meet your dedicated HOA board." I almost spit out my drink. It all started to make sense, the letters, the warnings, the way the HOA suddenly revised their property boundaries to include me. It wasn't a coincidence. It was Carl. He was behind the whole thing. See, Carl had a reputation in the neighborhood. Everyone knew him as that guy. The one who complained about someone's holiday lights being too bright. The one who once reported a family for having a trampoline that didn't meet safety standards. He'd been vice president for 2 years, but according to some folks, he'd been acting like president since day one. And from what I heard, he had this dream to expand the HOA's reach. He wanted every property on that road, including mine, under their control. Total uniformity. Total order. No exceptions. Guess who was the last holdout? Yep. Me. Maybe that's what really ticked him off. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was because I didn't bow to his authority. Maybe it was because I never asked him for approval when I built my little deck or planted a few trees. Or maybe, and I'm just guessing here, it was because my place looked better than his. Now, I'm not one to brag, but let's just say my house aged well. Carl's? Not so much. His lawn was neat, sure, but it looked like he'd trimmed it with a ruler and a sense of rage. My yard had a little more personality: flowers, a small fountain, a rustic wood fence I'd stained myself. It wasn't HOA perfect, but it had character. And Carl hated character. After that big letter incident, I started noticing Carl acting weirder than usual. Like, sneaky weird. I'd be out front washing my truck, and I'd catch him standing at the corner of his driveway, phone in hand, pretending to check his messages. But I could see it, the little glint of the camera lens pointing right at me. Click. Click. The man was taking pictures. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe he was just texting. But then one morning, I caught him red-handed. I stepped out of my garage just as he crouched near my fence, snapping photos like he was working for a crime scene unit. I walked up, wiping grease off my hands. "Morning, Carl," I said, loud enough to make him jump. He froze. Then stood up, clearing his throat like a kid caught stealing cookies. "Oh, hey. Just doing a quick inspection." "Inspection?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Of my property?" He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that says, "Yeah, I'm busted, but I'm gonna pretend I'm not." "Well, technically, since your property borders HOA land, we're allowed to document any potential rule violations that affect the visual integrity of the neighborhood." "Visual integrity?" I repeated. "Carl, you're taking pictures of my bird feeder." He had the nerve to nod. "Yes, it's not an HOA-approved design. It could be considered a visual distraction." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're serious?" "Completely," he said, tucking his phone away. "We just want everyone to maintain the same high standard." I stared at him for a long second, trying to decide if he was joking or just lost his mind. Spoiler, it was the second one. From that day on, it felt like I was being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I'd see Carl somewhere watering his already wet plants, checking his mailbox 6 times a day, always within sight of my property. Then the reports started. I found out through one of my friends on the HOA board, yeah, I had an insider, that Carl had been filing complaints about me almost every week. Stuff like unauthorized structural additions, my deck; non-compliant decorative fixtures, my garden lights; improper refuse placement, my trash can, again; and my personal favorite, potential safety hazard due to unconventional gate design. My gate design. The man really had it out for me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it got. This wasn't about keeping the neighborhood clean or enforcing rules. This was Carl trying to make an example out of me. The one house that didn't fall under his control, the one person who told him no. And that burned him up inside. One evening, as the sun was going down, I caught him again, this time crouched behind his car, camera in hand, snapping more photos of my fence. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about property lines or HOA nonsense anymore. Carl wasn't trying to protect the neighborhood, he was trying to win some personal power trip. He wanted me gone. And in that moment, standing there watching him sneak around like a wannabe detective, I realized something important. This wasn't just about rules, it was personal. If the first HOA letter felt like a slap, the next one was a full-on punchline. It showed up about 2 weeks after my talk with Carl, another thick, official-looking envelope, stuffed to the brim. I swear it was heavier than my last tax return. The heading read, "Comprehensive Violation Summary." Sounds fancy, right? Like something that should come with a lawyer or at least a notary stamp. But when I opened it, I couldn't help laughing, really laughing. Because this thing? It was comedy gold. They'd made a list, a long one. I counted 12 violations. And every single one was more ridiculous than the last. Number 1, mailbox color non-compliance. Apparently, my black mailbox was not consistent with approved community standards. Their rulebook demanded beige. Beige. I didn't even know beige mailboxes were a thing. Number 2, unapproved vehicle in driveway. That vehicle? My pickup truck. My perfectly legal, registered, insured, American-made truck. The same one I'd parked in that driveway for years. I guess they didn't like the fact that it wasn't a luxury SUV with an HOA decal. Number 3, improper tree trimming. According to them, one of my oak trees created visual disharmony with the neighborhood skyline. I didn't even know skylines existed in suburbia, but okay, Carl. Number 4, non-conforming garden fixtures. Translation, my gnome. They didn't like my garden gnome. Apparently, it was visually distracting. I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried. And it went on all the way down to inconsistent porch lighting temperature. Apparently my warm yellow bulbs clashed with the HOA-approved cool whites, and improper trash receptacle orientation. Yes, they actually wrote that, orientation. I sat there at my kitchen table, flipping through the pages, half in disbelief, half ready to frame this masterpiece of nonsense. It was obvious what this was, Carl's little revenge project. He'd clearly spent his weekends playing detective, scribbling notes, and filing reports like some kind of suburban spy. And now, the HOA had bundled up all his petty complaints into one massive, completely made-up violation list. At first, I couldn't even be mad. It was just too absurd. I called my buddy Dave, one of the few sane neighbors on the street, and read him a few of the violations over the phone. By the time I got to non-conforming birdhouse color, he was wheezing. "Man," he said, "you've officially made it. You're public enemy number one in HOA land." But once the laughter died down, I realized this wasn't just some silly prank. This was the HOA's way of building a case, a paper trail. They were trying to document me into submission. And that's when something in me switched. See, I'm not the type to start trouble. But if you come after me with nonsense paperwork and fake threats, I'm not going to just roll over. No, sir. If they wanted to play the game, I'd play it better. So, I started documenting everything. I took photos of my house, every angle, every tree, every mailbox screw. I even recorded videos of my lawn, just to prove the grass was well kept and green. I started keeping a logbook with dates, times, and every weird interaction I had with Carl or the HOA. And, of course, I printed their letters too, every single one. I started a binder I called the Book of Nonsense. By the end of that week, it was already half full. Then I installed a small camera by my porch. Not because I was paranoid, okay, maybe a little, but because I wanted evidence in case Carl pulled another inspection. Sure enough, 2 days later, caught him again. There he was, standing in front of my driveway, holding up his phone, snapping photos of my truck. I walked out and waved. "Need a better angle, Carl? Want me to pose with it?" He didn't answer. Just walked off like he didn't hear me. But I could tell, the man was fuming. And honestly, that made it kind of fun. Still, I knew this was escalating. The letters weren't stopping, and each one sounded more legal than the last. You could practically feel the smugness coming off the paper. They were clearly trying to scare me into submission, or at least get me to voluntarily comply. But here's the thing, I'm not scared of paperwork. If anything, I thrive on it. So I made it my mission to match their nonsense with my own brand of order. Photos, receipts, timestamps, even drone shots. If they wanted a war of paperwork, well. Up until this point, the whole situation felt like a joke, a ridiculous, over-the-top HOA soap opera with Carl as the self-appointed villain and me as the unwilling co-star. Sure, the fake violations were annoying, and the letters were piling up, but honestly, part of me still thought it was all just empty noise. That changed the day the word eviction showed up. It was a Saturday morning. I just finished mowing my non-compliant lawn and was feeling pretty good about it until I checked my mailbox. There it was again, that familiar HOA logo, bold letters, and a tone that screamed "We mean business." The letter inside started off in their usual, overly polite way. "Dear resident, despite multiple notices of non-compliance, your continued disregard for community standards has left us no choice but to escalate enforcement actions." Then, the next paragraph hit me like a ton of bricks. Per Article 7, Section C of the Community Covenant, the association reserves the right to pursue forcible removal of residents found in violation of established guidelines. I remember just staring at that line for a full minute, rereading it over and over. Forcible removal. Eviction. My first thought was, they can't be serious. My second thought was, can they actually do that? For a split second, I'll admit, I felt a knot in my stomach. I mean, getting letters about mailboxes is one thing, but eviction? That's next level. That's the kind of word that gets your heart racing, even when you know you've done nothing wrong. I paced around my kitchen, rereading the letter. It said I had 7 days to rectify all outstanding violations or the HOA would take appropriate legal measures. I didn't even know what that meant, but it sounded bad. So, I did what any normal person would do when faced with nonsense wrapped in legal jargon. I grabbed my laptop and started digging. I spent the next few hours deep in property records, county ordinances, and homeowner laws. I even pulled out my old property deed again, tracing every word like it was a treasure map. And guess what? The more I read, the more I realized just how full of it they were. See, my property was recorded outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I wasn't a member, I didn't pay dues, and I never signed their covenant. Which meant they had zero legal authority over me. None. Zilch. All their threats? Total bluff. But that didn't make it any less infuriating. Because bluff or not, they were trying to scare me, to bully me into compliance using big, scary words like legal action and eviction. And honestly, it almost worked. For about an hour that morning, I let the fear sink in. I imagined the worst lawsuits, court summons, even losing my home. But then that fear turned into something else. Something sharper. Anger. Because now it wasn't just about petty rules or Carl's ego anymore. It was about intimidation, about a group of people trying to strong-arm a homeowner who'd done absolutely nothing wrong. I knew I couldn't just let that slide. So, I decided to get serious. I called a local real estate attorney, a calm, no-nonsense guy named Dan, and explained everything. From the bogus letters to the boundary revision nonsense. When I finished, there was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Dan said, "Let me guess, HOA trying to claim jurisdiction they don't have?" "Exactly," I said. "They're threatening eviction." He chuckled, that slow, confident lawyer laugh that instantly made me feel better. "They can't evict you. They don't own your property. Unless you signed a covenant, they're bluffing." Happens more often than you'd think. I could almost feel my blood pressure drop. "So what do?" I asked. "Document everything, which, from the sound of it, you've already been doing. Then, we'll send them a formal cease and desist. And if they keep it up, we'll talk about legal action." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand again. Like I wasn't just playing defense anymore. After we hung up, I leaned back in my chair, that eviction letter still sitting on my table. A few hours earlier, it had scared the life out of me. But now, looking at it, all I saw was desperation. The HOA wasn't enforcing the law, they were pretending to. And Carl? He'd finally overplayed his hand. I picked up that letter, held it between my fingers, and laughed. "So, you want to fight?" I said out loud, almost to myself. Then I folded it neatly, slid it into my new binder right behind unauthorized birdhouse incident, and wrote today's date on the page. Because this time, I wasn't backing off. I wasn't going to ignore their nonsense. I was going to fight back legally. After that eviction threat, I knew this wasn't just going to blow over. These people weren't going to stop because I explained things. No, they were doubling down. And if I wanted this circus to end, I had to hit them where it hurt, the facts. So I switched gears. No more just reacting to their nonsense, now it was time to build my case. I started with the basics. I pulled out every document I had, my property deed, the title records, even the original subdivision map I got when I bought the house. I spread them all across the dining table like I was about to solve a true crime case. And in a way, I kind of was. The more I read, the clearer it became, my property sat completely outside the HOA's jurisdiction. There wasn't a single mention of any association obligations on my deed. The boundaries ended right across the street. It was all there in black and white. But I wasn't stopping there. I wanted confirmation, something official that would shut them up once and for all. So I went down to the county recorder's office the next morning. Now, if you've ever been in one of those offices, you know they move slower than a dial-up modem. But when I finally got to talk to a clerk and showed her my documents, she gave me this look like, "Oh, they tried that again, huh?" She pulled up the parcel map, scrolled for a few seconds, and said, "Yep, you're not part of the HOA. Never have been." "Never?" I asked. "Never. The association boundary ends here," she pointed to a thin, highlighted line on her screen, "and your property's right over that line." I can't lie, I almost laughed out loud. Can I get that in writing? I asked. Absolutely, she said, printing it right then and there. I left that office holding a stamped county record that basically said, "This guy doesn't owe your HOA a single thing." But here's where things got interesting. When I started digging deeper into the HOA's own paperwork, public records, old filings, meeting minutes, I noticed something fishy. A few years back, the HOA had submitted a revised community boundary map. And on that new map, mysteriously, my property and a few others that were never under the HOA suddenly were. I don't know about you, but I'm no cartographer. Still, even I could tell that line had been moved. Like, literally drawn to scoop up our land. And when I saw the name of the person who signed off on that revision? Take a wild guess. Carl. Vice President of the HOA. My charming, photo-snapping neighbor. Turns out, good old Carl had been trying to expand HOA control years ago, not for community improvement, but for money and power. The more homes under the HOA, the more fees they collected, and the more authority he got to wave around. And since my property sat right on the edge and happened to have a better view, a larger lot, and a slightly newer house, I became his personal target. It wasn't about rules or standards. It was about control. I could almost picture the meeting where it happened. Carl sitting at the table, waving his laser pointer at a map and saying, "Let's just adjust the line a little bit." And everyone else nodding, not realizing he was quietly pulling other people's land into the HOA trap. But he messed with the wrong homeowner. Now I had county records, property deeds, the original boundary map, and even the HOA's suspicious revision, all neatly filed and labeled in my ever-growing binder of justice. I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was preparing for battle. To make sure I had every angle covered, I even called the original property developer. Luckily, the guy still lived in town, and he remembered the neighborhood well. When I asked if my house was ever meant to be part of the HOA, he didn't even hesitate. "Nope," he said. "That lot was intentionally left out. We wanted a few non-HOA options for buyers who didn't want restrictions." I could have hugged the guy. "So if the HOA's claiming authority over me now," I started. He cut me off, "Then they're lying. Plain and simple." That was it, the smoking gun. I had county proof, developer confirmation, and a whole stack of HOA paperwork that basically showed how Carl had tried to pull a fast one. I sat back in my chair that night, flipping through my organized folder like some kind of suburban detective. Every piece of paper told the same story. Carl had been trying to redraw the lines for his own gain. Turns out, I muttered to myself, half amused, half furious, he tried to rope in my land just to boost HOA fees and control me. Well, not anymore. Because now I had everything I needed to turn the tables. I knew I couldn't just keep this fight behind emails and letters anymore. Nope, this had to go face to face. And luckily for me, the HOA was holding their next community meeting that Thursday night. Now, technically, I wasn't a member, so I didn't get an invite. But since Carl and his little army had decided I was part of their expanded community, I figured that made me more than qualified to attend. So I showed up. They were hosting it in the clubhouse, one of those sterile little rooms with beige walls, metal folding chairs, and a big HOA board of directors banner taped crookedly on the wall. There was a snack table too, but of course, it was the most depressing spread you've ever seen, half-stale cookies and room-temperature lemonade. When I walked in, you could practically feel the temperature drop. Every head turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. You know that scene in movies where the saloon doors swing open and the outlaw walks in? That was me. Carl was sitting right in the middle at the long folding table, wearing his best authority face. Clipboard in front of him, papers neatly stacked, pen in hand like he was about to sign a law into existence. "Well," he said, forcing a tight smile, "this meeting is for HOA members only." I smiled back. Perfect. You've been claiming I'm one, so here I am. A few people chuckled quietly. Carl's smile twitched. He sighed. Fine. You can stay for your clarification, but please keep it brief. Gladly, I said, setting my big binder down on the table with a satisfying thud. Now, let me tell you, nothing feels better than the sound of organized revenge landing on a plastic table. I started flipping through my pages, laying them out one by one. The county map, the property deed, the original developer's notes, and that suspiciously altered HOA map with Carl's signature right at the bottom. Let's start simple, I said. Here's the county record. My property line, right here, falls completely outside the HOA boundary. Always has. And here's the developer's original plan confirming that. Carl interrupted, voice all tight. That's outdated documentation. The boundaries were revised. I smiled, I'd been waiting for that line. Yeah, about that revision, I slid the paper across the table toward him. See this one? The map you filed with your name on it? Turns out that revision wasn't properly approved by the county. In fact, according to the clerk, it's invalid. He froze. The board members leaned in, whispering among themselves. One of them, a woman with a binder of her own, frowned. Wait, is that true, Carl? He stammered something about administrative updates, but I could tell the room was slipping out of his control. I kept going, calm and collected. Here's the funny part, your letters and threats all reference violations under HOA authority that doesn't legally exist on my property. Which means, every single notice you sent me was baseless. And that eviction threat? I paused, locking eyes with him. That's bordering on harassment. Now the whispers turned into full-on murmurs. One guy in the back, probably just there for the lemonade, muttered, wait, they tried to evict someone not even in the HOA? I almost felt bad for Carl. Almost. He tried to recover, shuffling papers, insisting that the association was acting in good faith. Good faith? I said. Carl, you've been standing outside my house taking pictures of my truck. That's not faith, that's obsession. The room went quiet. You could hear the air conditioner humming. Finally, the HOA president, who, up until now, had been letting Carl run the show, cleared his throat. Sir, what exactly are you asking from this board? I smiled. Simple. I want you to formally withdraw every violation notice, cease communication, and correct your records. And if I get one more letter in my mailbox, I'll be forwarding everything, including this conversation, to my attorney and the county office. The president nodded slowly, glancing at Carl, who now looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. After a long silence, the president finally said, duly noted. We'll review your documentation. That was code for, yeah, we're screwed. I stood up, slid my papers back into the binder, and looked around the room. Half the members were staring at Carl like they'd just realized their vice president had led them into a mess. I couldn't resist one last line. I turned toward the table, gave Carl a polite smile, and said, next time you want to evict someone, I paused for dramatic effect, make sure you actually own their street. Then I closed the binder, turned, and walked out. The door creaked behind me, and as it shut, I swear the silence inside was chef's kiss perfect. Outside, I took a deep breath, the cool night air hitting me like victory itself. For the first time in weeks, I felt free, like I'd just won a war without throwing a single punch. But deep down, I knew Carl wasn't done. He'd lost this round, sure. But a guy like that? He'd find another way to cause trouble. And I was ready for it. After that HOA meeting, word spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a family reunion. By the next morning, it felt like everyone knew what went down, and let's just say, not many people were on Team Carl anymore. It started with whispers. The kind that float around when folks walk their dogs or take out the trash. Did you hear what happened at the meeting? I heard the HOA try to evict someone not even in the HOA. Wait, was that Carl's idea? By the end of the week, it wasn't whispers anymore, it was open talk. The HOA board, of course, went into full damage control mode. They sent out a carefully worded clarification email to all members saying something like, due to an administrative oversight, certain boundary designations were misinterpreted. The board regrets any confusion caused. Translation, we got caught. I almost framed that email just for the satisfaction. A few days later, I noticed some changes. 2 of the board members, the treasurer and the secretary, quietly resigned. Their names disappeared from the HOA's website faster than you could say liability. Rumor was, they didn't want to be tied to Carl's mess. The HOA president even dropped by my house one evening, holding an envelope. He looked nervous. You could tell he wasn't used to showing up at someone's door to apologize. Just wanted to say, he began, shifting awkwardly, we've reviewed your documents, and you're absolutely correct. Your property is outside our association. Glad we cleared that up, I said, trying not to grin. He nodded quickly. We'll make sure you're removed from all correspondence and records moving forward. Then he handed me the envelope, a formal letter of retraction. Signed, stamped, and dated. Victory. But of course, not everyone was ready to let go. Carl was fuming. You could practically feel the smoke coming out of his ears whenever I waved at him from across the street. He'd stopped saying hi, not that he ever really did, and now he was on a full-blown mission to make my life miserable in new ways. One morning, I woke up to find a notice taped to my mailbox, not from the HOA this time, but from Carl personally. A handwritten cease and desist accusing me of harassment, defamation, and trespassing. Yeah. Because apparently showing up to the meeting he accused me into attending was trespassing now. I took a photo, laughed, and added it to my binder right under exhibits of Carl's craziness. A few days later, he tried reporting me to the city for unapproved construction activity. Wanna guess what the construction was? Me repainting my deck. With a permit. The inspector showed up, checked the paperwork, and laughed. You're good, he said. We've been getting a lot of these anonymous complaints lately. Oh, I bet I know who they're from, I said, grinning. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood was starting to wake up to the truth. People who used to avoid me now stopped to chat when I was mowing the lawn or walking my dog. A few even apologized. We didn't realize how far Carl went, one neighbor told me. He's been pushing everyone around for years. Apparently, I wasn't his first target, just the first one to fight back and win. Someone even started a little group chat for homeowners who wanted more transparency from the HOA. Within a week, it had half the neighborhood in it, and Carl wasn't invited. The next HOA meeting? Let's just say attendance was record-breaking. People wanted answers. I didn't go this time, I'd already had my showdown. But I heard from a friend that it got heated. Folks were calling for accountability, asking where the money went, questioning old decisions. Carl tried to take charge, but he got shouted down. By the end of that night, the man who used to strut around like the sheriff of suburbia was officially on thin ice. I didn't have to say a word. It's funny, I didn't plan on starting a rebellion or anything. I just wanted to be left alone. But once people saw how ridiculous the HOA's power games had gotten, they started realizing they didn't have to live under constant fear either. And Carl? He went from HOA hero to local punchline. I'd catch folks laughing when he walked by, or hear jokes like, "Careful, Carl might fine your grass for growing too tall." I'd just smile and wave. Through it all, I stayed calm. No yelling, no petty revenge, just good old-fashioned documentation and patience. Because at the end of the day, the best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's paperwork. It's watching someone dig their own hole while you sit back with a lemonade. And by that point, Carl was knee-deep. By this point, I'd played nice long enough. Carl had crossed every line there was to cross, from fake violations to personal harassment, and I wasn't about to sit around waiting for his next anonymous complaint. It was time to hit back, the legal way. See, one thing about me? I don't like drama, but I love receipts. And after months of nonsense, I had a mountain of them: emails, letters, photos, even video footage of Carl sneaking around with his phone like a wannabe detective. So, I made a call. I reached out to a property rights attorney, a calm, sharp guy named Mark who specialized in HOA disputes. The moment I laid everything out on his desk, he just sat back, whistled, and said, "They really tried to evict you? When you're not even in the HOA?" "Yep," I said, flipping open my binder. "And that's just the highlight reel." He laughed, then got serious. All right. We're going to make this very clear for them. Mark drafted a formal cease and desist letter, 3 pages long, professional, and brutal in the politest legal way possible. It outlined every violation of my rights, every false claim, every act of harassment. He even threw in a note about potential defamation, misuse of HOA authority, and intimidation tactics. And at the bottom, in bold print, any further attempts to contact or harass my client will result in immediate legal action. I swear, I could have framed that line. He sent copies to the HOA board, their attorney, yep, they had one, and of course, Carl himself. 2 days later, the silence was deafening. No new letters. No mysterious complaints. No Carl pacing by my fence with his phone out. Nothing. It was like someone had flipped the HOA's crazy switch off overnight. Then the real panic started, not from me, but from them. The HOA president actually called my lawyer's office the next day, practically stammering through apologies. He said they were reviewing procedures and reassessing internal accountability. Translation: Carl got them in deep trouble, and now they were scrambling to clean up his mess. A week later, I got a short, typed letter from the HOA, not one of those fake violation ones this time, but a full retraction and apology. It said, after reviewing legal documents and county property records, the association acknowledges that your residence does not fall within our jurisdiction. We sincerely regret any inconvenience caused and will ensure this matter is permanently closed. Permanently closed. Those were the magic words. I read it twice, smiled, and slid it into my binder right at the front as the final piece of the story. But Carl? He didn't go quietly. Apparently, after the legal notice hit, he'd shown up at the next board meeting red-faced and fuming, trying to spin it like he was the victim. This is all being blown out of proportion, he yelled. But nobody was buying it anymore. The board had already distanced themselves from him. A month later, he resigned from his HOA position, though everyone knew he'd been pushed out. The neighborhood was calmer after that. No more mystery notes, no more threats, no more beige mailbox drama. Just peace. Finally. I can't lie, the moment I realized it was really over, I felt this massive weight lift off my chest. It was like I'd been holding my breath for months and finally exhaled. All that stress, all those ridiculous accusations, gone. I sat on my porch that evening with a cold drink, watching the sunset, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. It wasn't just about winning. It was about standing my ground. About proving that you don't have to be bullied into silence, even by people waving fake authority. And honestly, the sweetest part was how quiet everything got afterward. No HOA letters. No Carl. Just peace and the sound of victory rustling through the trees I apparently trimmed too much. For the first time in a long while, I finally felt at home again. You know how sometimes life just has a way of balancing itself out? Yeah, that's exactly what happened next. After the legal dust settled, things in the neighborhood got quiet. Too quiet, actually. It was the kind of peace that only happens when the loudest guy in town suddenly has nothing left to say. Carl, the self-appointed sheriff of suburbia, had gone radio silent. No more photos, no more notes, no more smug waves from across the street. His prized clipboard was nowhere to be seen, and his usual HOA patrol walks? Gone. It was like he'd vanished, or, more accurately, been vanished. Turns out, the fallout hit harder than I expected. About a month after the cease and desist went out, I started hearing whispers. The kind that always start with, "You didn't hear this from me, but..." Apparently, the HOA board had done an internal review after my lawyer's letter landed. And during that review, they uncovered a bunch of stuff Carl had done behind the scenes: unauthorized filings, exaggerated fees, even a few creative accounting choices that made everyone raise their eyebrows. Long story short, the HOA board didn't just lose trust in Carl, they threw him under the bus. First, they made him resign for personal reasons. Then, a few weeks later, word got around that the HOA had to pay some legal costs over the mess he started. Nobody knew the full number, but one neighbor told me, let's just say they won't be upgrading the clubhouse furniture this year. I couldn't help but smile at that one. It wasn't about revenge, really. It was about accountability. Carl had spent months trying to make me look like the problem, and now, he was the one everyone avoided at the mailbox. Poetic, huh? Then came the best part, the karma moment. One Saturday morning, I was outside washing my truck, the same unauthorized vehicle he'd once tried to report, when I saw him. Carl. He was walking his dog down the street, head down, sunglasses on, trying to blend in like a spy who'd been exposed. I figured he'd ignore me, but as he got closer, he did this awkward little wave. "Hey, how's it going?" he said, voice all chipper, like we were long-lost buddies. I blinked. "Oh, hey Carl. Haven't seen you in a while. Everything all right?" He laughed nervously. Yeah. Just, busy with other stuff." Stepped away from the board. Needed a break. Yeah, I said, trying to keep a straight face. "Paperwork'll do that to you." He nodded like he didn't catch the jab, then quickly added, "Glad things worked out for you, though. No hard feelings, right?" I smiled. None at all. And honestly, I meant it. I didn't hate the guy, he just got drunk on a little power and forgot that neighbors aren't subjects. But I wasn't about to spend another ounce of energy being mad. He gave a half-hearted chuckle, tugged at his dog's leash, and walked off. I swear, his shoulders looked a little smaller than before. After that, I'd see him around now and then, waving awkwardly from his car or pretending to be deep in conversation whenever we crossed paths. The HOA still existed, technically, but it was quieter, humbler. People actually started liking each other again. And me? I went back to enjoying my peaceful, HOA-free life. No fines. No threats. Just the occasional chuckle every time I saw that beige mailbox across the street, Carl's, of course, standing there like a reminder that no amount of fake authority beats cold, hard paperwork. It's funny how power works. One day you're the enforcer with a clipboard and a rulebook, the next, you're just another guy waving awkwardly at the neighbor you try to evict. When I look back on everything that happened, the fake violations, the letters, the threats, the endless drama, it still amazes me how far some people will go just to feel in control. It started with a simple misunderstanding and turned into a full-blown power trip. And that's really the lesson here, unchecked power can twist even the simplest roles into something ugly. Give someone a title, a clipboard, and a little authority, and suddenly they think they're running a kingdom instead of a community. But here's the thing, you always have rights. Even when they make you feel like you don't. Even when they send letters that sound official, or threats that sound final. Those words only have power if you believe them. I learned that the hard way, and then, thankfully, the satisfying way. If you're dealing with an HOA like this, or any kind of local bully hiding behind rules, here's my advice. Pushpin document everything. Take photos, keep every letter, record dates, and times. The moment you start keeping receipts, their confidence starts to crack. Pushpins stay calm. They feed on reaction. When you stay collected, you take away their favorite weapon, your frustration. Pushpin don't let fear silence you. Speak up. Ask questions. Involve your local authorities if you need to. Because silence is exactly what these power-hungry types rely on to keep control. The truth is, HOA boards were created to help communities, not to control them. But when that balance breaks, it's up to people like you and me to push it back. Not with anger, but with facts. Not with shouting matches, but with evidence. And in the end, that's what really won, not revenge, not pride, but simple truth backed by documentation. Because when you strip away the bluster, the titles, and the rules they twist to their advantage, all that's left is reality. And reality doesn't bend for ego. That's the beauty of standing your ground. At the end of it all, my home stayed mine. The peace returned. The grass grew back. The world moved on. But every time I see that corner lot, that little HOA sign by the entrance, I can't help but smile, not out of spite, but out of satisfaction. They wanted to make an example out of me. But instead, I became the example of what happens when you don't back down. So to anyone out there fighting their own HOA nightmare, remember this. You're not powerless. You're not crazy. And you're definitely not alone. Keep your cool, know your rights, and stand firm. Because sometimes the quiet homeowner with a folder full of receipts is the scariest person in the room. They tried to evict me from my own home, but in the end, I evicted their illusion of power. Soft guitar fades in. Aerial shot of a calm, sunlit neighborhood. Text fades onto the screen.